Back on KOAN 1080 AM, 95.1 FM. We have Jim Simpson waiting online. Jim is an author, a columnist. I mentioned before, publishes Washington Times, Accuracy in the Media. In fact, we have a very important story up currently on the website, joemiller.us, our lead story that we're going to ask Jim to talk about today. And I think he also has some kind of unique views on Islam. We might debate that. And please call in 569-1080 if you have any questions at all about what he's saying, or if you want to engage him in a debate on a particular issue. We're going to have Jim on here in just a moment to talk about that and other issues that he is clearly an expert in. I've been impressed to see. I've met Jim personally when I was back east in Washington, D.C. He is very, very thorough in his research. When he gets a hold of an issue, he doesn't stop. He's covered some interesting cases, like, for example, an individual back east who was targeted by local law enforcement. And I'm not even sure how that case came out. But now that I have Jim on the air, and this is kind of a little off topic, maybe you could tell us about what happened with that case, the gentleman who had, I guess, federal and state agencies descend on his house about a year and a half ago.
Yeah, Terry Porter. Well, actually, he after that report came out, they treated him with kid gloves, which we were all grateful for. And he had broken the law, but it was not something that warranted about 150 SWAT and armored vehicles. All day camping out on his lawn trying to find him. He did probation. He got a misdemeanor probation with the option to have it expunged in like 6 months or something. So it was a very good ending for him, because he had an old charge from when he was a kid, and he had an old shotgun, and somebody made up stories about him and brought down the whole darn state police infrastructure.
Well, that's why I like you, Jim, because you take these stories out there that reflect kind of the cutting-edge topics. In that case, basically the militarization of domestic law enforcement,
right.
And of course, the cooperation between federal and state agencies, and you really bring them to light, and you put the pressure then on those that are trying to pull the country in the wrong direction. And that's kind of what I've seen in this article that you put out about the race-based politics that media is pushing, how the media is trying to move the country in a direction that obviously is not good for it. Can you tell us a little bit about what you found in this article that we have up at joemiller.us right now?
Well, it's nothing that'll really surprise anybody who pays any attention. The media harps on the idea that white America is this racist monolith, and nothing could be further from the truth. But they use that to provoke and inflame racial tensions. And I really think it's because most of the media have been, they're radicals, let's face it. Most of today's media are radicals, and they buy into the whole idea of a socialist revolution. They buy into the whole idea of America as this lost capital, corrupt capital country that needs to be brought to its knees. I mean, they go right along with the Obama narrative. And the trouble is, we all know as Americans, as red-blooded Americans, is the furthest thing from the truth. America is welcomes all comers. It helps countries in need, whether they are like us or not. I mean, we went to Pakistan during the earthquake there, and we all go around the world. We're not anybody's enemy, but they want us to look that way, and this is just nothing more than leftist provocation. So they have this narrative in the media that there's this institutional racism. We have an institutionally racist bias against blacks in this country, and that is reflected by the disproportionate number of blacks that are arrested, that are convicted, and that wind up in prison. But the fact of the matter is that it's nothing to do with white racism. It has to do with the fact that black inner city has become a cesspool of crime, and that is largely the result of white liberal policies that were designed to keep them in the ghetto and make sure that they were reliable votes for Democrats. And that's really the bottom line. And
so with respect to the media and what it's doing and trying to inflame kind of the racial hatred by suggesting, racially disparate arrest, assaults, rates of incarceration. Why do you think, I want to, and maybe in the next segment we can talk about those statistics, because I think you brought out some just fascinating stats on why we can show that the media is doing what it's doing. But what is the underlying motivation of the media? Is it just stories? Is it they want to sell news? Or are they just hand in hand with the liberal agenda to keep blacks down and keep them from actually, in some cases, getting out of the ghetto?
Oh, no, I think they're really down with the agenda. They are really down with the agenda. I mean, when news media all over the country, suppress these absolutely horrific violent crimes, when they suppress the endless litany of knockout games and the endless litany of flash mobs where people, create riots instantly or just go in and knock off a store, they never mention the race. They rarely mention the event. And and it's designed to suppress the whole idea that there's a racial problem from that end, as opposed to from the end of the majority of the people in this country. And it's not even
Jim,
really a white-black thing.
Right.
It's an American versus an anti-American thing.
Right. And we've got a caller that's been waiting online. Let's go to Carol just for a brief question. Jim, you have time for a question? Hi, Carol. You're on the air with the Joe Miller Show and Jim Simpson.
Hi, Joe. First, I'd like to say I love the show. Keep it up. And second, really, I have more of a comment than a question. As a parent of 2 service members, I don't feel they're safe with this president and his policies. And disarming our military, I feel I'm physically getting sick over it. I'm afraid for all of the military because they've been left behind before, and I'm afraid they'll be left behind again, and someday it'll be my sons. And I just don't know what to do anymore other than just, vent.
Well, that's why we're having the show, Carol, is to activate people, because they're, sitting on our hands and venting is not, there are many things that we can do. We can vote with our pocketbook. We can certainly alert people to the truth. Jim, you're involved in the information gathering and promulgating the truth. That activates people, even when you've got a system that is so biased against what we would see as our cause.
Right.
And we're getting ready to hit a break. Carol, I appreciate that observation. Thank you so much for the call. And Jim, we're going to talk about the statistics that you found in just a few minutes. We want to talk a little bit about what you found statistically that proves up the media's efforts to create racial tension by falsely reporting the fact. What did you find in your study?
Okay. Well, first of all, they just don't report them. It's not that they falsely report them, that they just don't report them. And they hype the other, like, for example, they hype Ferguson as this great injustice against this guy, Michael Brown, when we all know that he was a thug who got shot because he threatened a police officer. You just don't do that. But, okay, so let's start with the beginning. They make a big deal, and there's a big the reason this is important, they're making a huge push for deinstitutionalization of criminals behind bars. And the left has always wanted to equate racial populations. They want to have, if blacks represent 13% of the population, they want 13% of our doctors to be black. They want 13% of our lawyers to be black. They want 13% of our actors to be black. You've heard that argument all over it. And they say, well, blacks are 13% of the population. They should only be 13% of the incarcerated criminals, and yet they're actually 40% of incarcerated criminals, and that's a fact. They are 40%. I have a table in this study where I show the whites are 39%, Hispanics are 19%, blacks are 40% of the incarcerated population. That's a fact. Why is that? Is that because of institutional racism, or is it because blacks are committing more crimes? Well, we all know what the facts are. The fact is that blacks commit many more crimes, vastly more crimes than any other group. And so I break that out. For example, in 2013, blacks of approximately 10,000 murders committed, over 5,000 were committed by blacks, about 4,000 were committed by whites, and then others committed about 250. So blacks committed more murders than whites did, although they are only 13% of the population. Murder rates, the murder rates per 100,000 people. For whites, it's 2.7 per 100,000. For blacks, it's 23 per 100,000. There's no comparison with any other racial or ethnic group. We're all in the single digits except the blacks, which 23 per 100, those are rates similar to what you'd find in some third world country. And it's eye-popping by age. For example, between 20 and 24 years of age, whites commit 6.3 murders per 100,000 people. Blacks commit 109 per 100,000 people. There's just no comparison. And the same thing is true when you look at any kind of violent crime. I didn't put a table of all the violent crime, but I went through and found that blacks consistently commit about 40% of all of the violent crimes. That's rape, robbery, and aggravated assault. And that's consistent. I only went back for 4 years, but every year that's a relatively consistent percentage of the total crimes. So there's nothing noteworthy to say that blacks are 40% of the incarcerated population when their crime rate is at least 40% of the total crimes committed in the country. And now you get into the murders by race and of victim and offender. That was an interesting table that the FBI puts out every year, and it's not a complete table. It only doesn't add up all of the murders that were committed, but when the race of the victim and the offender were known, those are compiled in these statistics. So, for example, whites or blacks committed twice the number of murders of whites than whites committed of blacks. And whites are, a much larger proportion of the population. If those proportions were reversed, the number of whites being killed by blacks would have been huge, and the vice versa would have been very tiny.
So how does that relate to the media narrative?
Well, the media narrative is that blacks face institutional bias, institutional racism, and they're being incarcerated at rates that are way beyond what they should be, what's justifiable. And they never go into the number of crimes they commit, because obviously if they went into that, they would have to admit that they're wrong. But they don't want to do that, because the narrative they want to promote is that we're a racist society and we are oppressing blacks. Nothing could be further from the truth. We've gone out of our ways in every way possible, from affirmative action and welfare and all kinds of special programs, many of which most people don't even know about, but they exist in an attempt to help people out of poverty, and it just doesn't work.
So you also did a table on officers feloniously killed by race. Yep. What did you find in that?
Well, that was interesting. There's this, after the Michael Brown thing, the left started harping that narrative that there's this war against blacks, that police are engaged in a war against blacks. And once again, if you look at the statistics, you find out that that is a completely fraudulent narrative. For example, Mark Lamont Hill said that once every 28 hours, a unarmed black person is killed by police. Well, the way he figured that out was he looked up the number of blacks that were killed by police, security guards, and other people, vigilantes, whoever, and divided that by the number of hours in a year, and you get 28. You get one person killed for every 28 hours. But he neglected to say that about two-thirds of those 300 blacks were armed with a firearm, and so it's not surprising that they got shot by the police. And most of the other ones were killed in, like, car crash. Some of them were accidents. Some of them were killed in police chases. Some of them were shot by police when they used their automobile as a weapon or had some other weapon that wasn't a gun. And so when you delve into the statistics, you learn that there's actually only a few cases where it's not justified, and those are usually just straight-on mistakes. Those are tragic mistakes, but they're mistakes. Like, for example, when a SWAT team went in to bust a drug dealer, and one of the officers' guns went off, and it went through a wall and hit an 8-year-old kid who was sleeping. And, it was a mistake. It was a tragic mistake, but it was a mistake. Most of them are not. Most of them are justified.
Right. So have you had a chance, and just to move to the comical a little here, have you ever listened to Chris Rock's video, How Not to Get Your ASS Kicked by the Police?
No,
he's
but
a black,
I can imagine.
He's a black comedian, and if your ears are sensitive, I don't recommend that you go to YouTube and pull this up.
Funny.
But it is absolutely hilarious. He goes through, if you're a brother on the street and, you've got a gun in your band when you're jumping over a turnstile on the subway, expect to get your ASS kicked by the police. And it has millions of views, but real, of course, salty language. But it basically he's speaking to what you're saying, that, if you take away, the stimuli, that is creating the responses, then you end up with a lower number. And of course, we aren't getting at all to the underlying causal factors about income and all the other things that could be playing into this. These are just straight out facts, right?
Yeah. Those are, but we do get into that. I interviewed Michael Massey, who's a black guy who has a very interesting perspective, and you can read his interview. It's embedded in the story. I interviewed Alveda King, who is Martin Luther King Jr.'s niece. She has a very interesting take on it. And both of them and I agree, the problem, and the media definitely participates in this, is it encourages and promotes an entitlement mentality that tells people that really, if you think of somebody coming up in the ghetto, usually the father's not around, the mother's maybe not around half the time. These people are not getting any guidance from anybody except what they learn in school and what they see in the media. And the media tells them you're justified to do whatever the heck you want.
Right.
Because
it's a
you've been
issue.
oppressed. Yeah, because you've been oppressed and you're a victim. And so, kill Whitey. What the heck?
And then you have the Ferguson issue. Jim, where can people get a hold of you if they want to learn more?
Well,
go to joemiller.us and read Jim Simpson's articles, right?
There you go. Or go to crisisnow.net, which is a portal to my examiner.com website where I post a lot of things.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, Jim, we want to have you back again. I know you've got some views on Islam, unique. We want to discuss and debate those. But thank you so much for coming on the Joe Miller Show.
Joe, that'd be great. Thanks for having me.